covered the campaign, the recent campaign, the presidential campaign, and the one question that people are still asking was the press fair to Goldwater? And I'm one of the people who think that the press was not fair to Goldwater. For one thing, we quoted him. But I tried to be fair to Goldwater. And if you recall, during the missile crisis, Secretary McNamara said our missiles were good, and Goldwater said our missiles weren't any good. And nobody knew. So I wrote a column, and I said there was only one way to find out. And that was to put Barry Goldwater in a rowboat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and have McNamara fire one of the missiles. Now, if the missile missed Barry Goldwater, that meant it was no good. And McNamara would have to publicly apologize. On the Ed Sullivan Show. But if the missile hit Barry Goldwater, he'd have to withdraw his name from the presidential election. Now, as soon as the article appeared, the first person I heard from was McNamara, who said, "I'll do it." But Goldwater said he'd like to think it over. I've been doing an awful lot of traveling around, and I've been lecturing in a lot of towns. And the one thing that I've discovered, particularly in the smaller towns, is they have 4 or 5 organizations to fight communists. But they don't have any communists. For example, I was in Sarasota, Florida, and the nearest card-holding communist was in Miami. And Miami wouldn't let him go. So they called Jacksonville. And Jacksonville said, "We need all we've got." So I've called for a redistribution of the Communist Party. So each town would get one. And he'd be kind of the resident communist. And he'd be paid by the town to be the threat there. They'd throw garbage on his lawn, break his windows, beat up his kids. And I sent this idea to J. Edgar Hoover, and he never answered my letter. Which made me write an article recently about the fact that I didn't think there was any J. Edgar Hoover. And I said in this article that he was actually made up by the Reader's Digest. Another thing that occurred to me, it probably hasn't hit you people yet, or what the toy people are doing to America, is what they're doing in regards to these dolls. Now, when I first came back, my daughter asked me for a Barbie doll. And it only cost $3, and one doll looks just like another as far as I'm concerned. So I thought nothing more of it until a week later when my daughter returned and said, "Barbie needs an evening gown." And I said, "So does your mother." She says, but there's one in the catalog for only $4. And I said, what catalog? And she said, the one that came with the doll. And I grabbed the catalog, and much to my horror, I discovered what the makers of Barbie were up to. They'll let you have the Barbie doll for $3, but you have to buy clothes for it $3 a crack. They have about 200 outfits from negligees to mink jackets in the catalog, and a girl's status in the neighborhood is based on how many Barbie outfits her doll has. In a month, I had managed to spend $200 clothing Barbie. So I only spent $45 clothing my daughter. I thought I was squared away until one day my daughter came in and announced that Barbie was lonely. So I said, let her join a sorority. And she said she wants Ken. And I said, who's Ken? And she showed me the catalog, and sure enough, there was a doll named Ken. The same size as Barbie, with crew-cut hair and a vinyl plastic chest. If you don't get Ken, my daughter warned, Barbie will become an old maid. So I went out and I bought Ken, and pretty soon I had put up $400 to protect my original $3 investment. A few weeks later, my daughter announced Barbie and Ken were getting married. The marriage clothes were in the catalog, and so was their dream house, which cost $29. Once the wedding was over, I thought everyone would live happily ever after. But I made a mistake. I bought my daughter another doll called Midge, who was supposed to be a friend of Barbie's. And one day my daughter came to me and she said, Barbie wants to get a divorce. I said, why? And she said, Ken has fallen in love with Midge. And I finally discovered what had happened. It seems once Barbie had gotten married, she became a housewife and spent all her time cleaning up the dream house and cooking meals for Ken. She either dressed in a house coat or an old dress, and she kind of let herself go. Midge, on the other hand, always showed up at the house dressed to the teeth. Since Midge had no dream house to clean, she could afford to spend all her time looking beautiful. I thought fast. If I allowed Ken and Barbie to get a divorce, I'd have to buy a whole new trousseau for Midge, which would cost me another $1,000. So I announced what Barbie and Ken needed was a marriage counselor. And I happened to be one on the side. And I went over to the dream house and had a serious talk with Barbie and Ken. Well, my daughter listened. And I told Barbie the reason she was losing Ken was because she had forgotten a housewife must always look pretty when her husband came home. And I told Ken the reason he was attracted to Midge was because she looked beautiful. Once she got married, she would look just like Barbie. And I told Ken he had a good deal and not to louse it up. And then I went over to Midge and warned her she could only visit Barbie and Ken once a week. And if she gave Barbie any more trouble, I was going to throw her away. Well, everything is going fine now, except Barbie's about to have a baby. And it's going to cost me another $135. I've been writing many articles, and every once in a while you discover that what you're writing is either taken as fact or what you have invented becomes fact. And two examples of this had to do with I once wrote a story about when Johnson announced this A-11 plane, this new jet that was supersonic plane. I said the reason he announced that is he didn't want to announce the real secret plane we had, which was a plane that could fly so slow that nothing could shoot it down. And I revealed that the design of this plane, which they were working on, would be two wings, one on top of each other. And then in the center there would be kind of a cockpit, an open one. And then in the front there'd be a stick that twirled. And there'd be a machine gun that could shoot right between the stick. And a week later I got a letter from Fairchild Aircraft who said, "How did you know we were working on this plane?" Now, one of the articles that caused a big furor had to do with, I kept reading in all the magazines, the women's magazines, about sex and the college girl. And should a girl have an affair before she gets married? And nobody seemed to have bothered to talk to the college boy. So I took a survey, which I made up. And I printed it. And in my column I said that I talked to many college students. And I asked a Yale senior home on vacation if he believed a man should have an affair before he is married. And he said, absolutely not. College girls may call me old-fashioned, but I think a nice boy should remain pure. I'm not against necking if it doesn't go too far. But I feel, as do most of the men at Yale, that a boy should be able to say no to a girl without hurting her feelings. University of Southern California football player said, I think there's been an overemphasis of promiscuity on college campuses. It's true that there are a few weak men who may succumb to a persistent co-ed, but the majority of college men believe in chastity and wouldn't think of having an affair during the happiest years of their lives. And a Princeton man said, I think it's all right for college girls to be emancipated. After all, they have nothing to lose. But as a man, I'm very idealistic about these things. Besides, I think girls think so much less of you when you give in. And a Harvard man said, and this was before all the trouble at Harvard, when I first came to Harvard, several of the students asked me if I would go all the way with a girl. I didn't even know what it meant. But when I found out, I reported them to the dean. And a University of Michigan swimmer said, I was going steady with a girl from Ohio State. One night she asked me the question, and I made her get out of my car. I guess I cried all night long. But the next day, my fraternity brothers told me I had done the right thing. And finally, a shiny-faced Georgetown University student. Unfortunately, the subject has never come up in Washington. Well, I said in my article I talked to 200 male college students, and not one of them admitted to having had a promiscuous relationship. And it was a very encouraging thing and gave me faith in the youth of America. And I said if my survey was correct, the college boy would graduate as pure as the driven snow. Now, after this article appeared, this is true, I got about 400 letters. And 395 of them were from college boys. And they all asked the same question. Who did you talk to? Now, if you read my column, you probably know I write quite a bit about my wife and my children. And they're supposed to supply me with 2 out of the 3 articles a week. And if they don't, they go. And one, which my son supplied me with when he was 7 years old, and it shows you how fouled up we are in the world today, had to do when I took him to a movie in Paris. And it was a war movie about the Americans and the Japanese. And in the movie, the Japanese were very cruel to the American Marines. So when we came out of the movie, he said to me, the Japanese were very bad people during the war, weren't they, Daddy? I said, yes, but they're not bad people now. He said, why? Are they different people? I said, no, they're the same people. He said, then why did they do bad things? I said, well, they probably thought they were doing good things. And he said, well, why didn't someone tell them they were doing bad things? I said, we tried to, but they wouldn't listen. He said, remember the war picture we saw some weeks ago about the Germans beating up the people in the concentration camps? I said, yes. He said, the Germans are bad people, aren't they? I said, no, they were bad people, but now they're good people. I said, you see, once you start a war, you can't stay mad at the people after the war is over, because if you did, there'd be another war. He said, but in the movies they're still bad people. I said, yes. That's to remind us they were bad people, but we're supposed to forget it. And he looked at me blankly and he said, how many Russians did you kill during the war? And I said, I didn't kill any Russians during the war. During the war, they were good people. And he said, but if they were good people during the war, why are they bad people now? And I said, the Russians aren't bad people. Their leaders are bad people. And their leaders are trying to give us trouble all the time over Germany. And he said, with the bad Germans? I said, no, with the good Germans. The bad Germans want to kick the good Germans out of Berlin. And he said, then there still are bad Germans. And I said, of course, you clot. And he said, why didn't the Russians kill the bad Germans? I said, they don't think their Germans are bad. They think our Germans are bad. And their Germans are good. And we think their Germans are bad. And our Germans are good. I said, now do you understand? And he said, no. I said, well, it doesn't make any difference if you do or not. Everybody else does. Thank you.